Hello and welcome to our Demystifying the Virtual Agile Squads webinar. This session will be recorded. It will be available after the end of the webinar through our corporate website. And it will take around 30 minutes for the presentation. And then we can spend around 15 minutes to address any questions, any open topics that this presentation might bring to mind. First of all, we will be looking at the model. We will be looking at how it fits into an outsourcing/service provider context, how it fits into the current business environment, and how do enterprises that are not purely product development driven internet companies such as Spotify or whatever do benefit from the virtual squads approach themselves. Let's first clarify a bit what we mean by virtual. As George Pythagorsky was describing, there are a variety of constraints that are imposed on a physical team, such as same culture, same working hours, same office location. All of these constraints can be relaxed or even broken and still have a productive group of people working together towards a common goal, creating basically a continuum, different shades of virtualizing a team, shades between a purely physical team and a virtual team. The most obvious constraint is the common location. And while the recent pandemic has brought the focus on IT's remote work is nothing new, and it was not constrained to IT. It has been in the vocabulary long before IT became a part of our lives. For many years, there have been creative efforts to reshape collaboration, and they have been fighting a pretty difficult fight. A first step in the public consciousness of what will become remote teams and eventually virtual squads has been taken when telecommuting became an established word, which was already in the early 70s. During the oil crisis, proponents of remote work, such as Jack Niels, were evaluating the concept of a massive solution to traffic and gas problems. Space missions were another incubator for multidisciplinary teams, in a time when specialization was seen as a virtue, when staff-constrained environments were discovering how to make do with people that would mix skills in various fields into synergistic teams. The ISS is only one of many examples, dating back many years. This was uncommon in business. The business was still run by huge corporations, by large headquarters. A similar environment was only created in technology when the startups in their initial phases had to make do with quite limited staff. When people started covering several roles and not be constrained by hierarchy, combining their skills to make use of the limited staff and move past that startup phase. And unfortunately, startups don't remain startups forever. The relative freedom allowed by informal groups was beginning to break down when companies were growing to hundreds of thousands of employees. Attempts to keep the startup mindset were originally seen as a sort of Peter Pan complex. In the early ages, getting out of the garage was a milestone eagerly desired, and companies such as Microsoft, Dell, Apple followed this path. They couldn't wait to grow past the garage days and become a true corporation. But successful approaches to scaling up the startup mindset have started to shape the context in the early 2000s, after the startup crisis, when successful startups remained strong in the market and started to overtake the internet revolution. While organizations were breaking away from the rigidity of hierarchy and silos, etc., they were also getting away from powerful headquarters and local branches. They were connecting digitally employees in a sort of mesh network. The next step was allowing for the teleworker in this mesh. And even companies that are quite strong in physical services and physical presence, such as Amazon, Apple, who run huge campuses, who have huge headquarters, invest a lot in their employees to keep them physically as close as possible. Now they have dedicated pure teleworking roles. They have infrastructure and processes in place for people to work remotely permanently. And this created a context where all we needed was a push. The infrastructure was there, the processes were there, the companies were built on startup, let's say, backbones. They had agility in their DNA, but companies were not ready to make the jump until the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, every other company, every other week, another company is announcing they will be making a significant part of their workforce remote permanently. We're not talking about the temporary pandemic response. We're talking about real long-term approaches, because the pandemic response has already validated in the few months that at the large scale, we can do what the outsourcing industry has been doing for a while, to work truly remotely and in truly virtual teams, and keep the productivity, be even more productive than on-site teams. And only during the month of May, we've seen companies such as Twitter, Square, and nowadays Mondelez, Nationwide, Barclays, companies in varied fields who are engaging on significant permanent remote work paths. Only last week, Facebook has announced that almost all of their new job offerings will allow for remote work. And they expect that in 5 to 10 years, half of their 70,000 employees would be permanently remote. And they might not even have to wait this long, because in the same week, Shopify and Coinbase made similar announcements. There is a snowball effect forming, and it might quickly shift from being a positive differentiator for a company to be an employer that allows remote work, to be a negative differentiator when you do not allow people to work remotely and to use this digital connectivity. And this brings us to people. The people who are now needing new ways to be attracted, new ways to be managed, new ways to think about teams and what a team is. We are witnessing the crystallization of something that was already present in the work environment for years, but industries were struggling to give it a shape. We've seen the explosion of open talent economy. We've seen the changing job expectations of younger generations, the evolving balance of work and personal life. Companies are compensating by constantly finding more friendly ways of working, more ways to engage and motivate these younger generations. We now have a new normal office, let's say, in technology, where everyone expects to find fruit, everyone expects to find a ping pong table, everyone expects friendliness from the employer. But lurking in the darkness, there was a very pragmatic and desperate need of companies that has existed for a long time. It was the need to reach faster into all possible resource pools across nation borders, relaxing constraints for formal education, relaxing all constraints of language, adapting to a small subset of global languages, just to get to the core resource that's driving technology. Talented people who can get the job done. How desperate? Desperate enough that the number of CIOs that were reporting they don't find enough people went up by 5% in a single year to an all-time high of 67%. This is based on the largest survey of its kind performed by Havenesh at KPMG. It involves more than 3,000 IT leaders in 100 plus countries, and only 1/3 of the companies were reportedly doing okay. This study shows that not only expensive advanced economies and countries that are seen as being more stripped of talent and having to rely on others are suffering from this talent shortage. It's a global issue in all 100 8 countries, the results were similar. And once more, for almost half of these companies, outsourcing was already part of how they are addressing their needs. 40% were already looking to growing their outsourced activities in 2019. So this survey was way before COVID. And now with COVID, change seems unavoidable. Opinions, what this change will be, what will be the timeline, what to expect, in which direction, that varies. But no one is doubting that change is happening as we speak. And what we went through before was the landscape before COVID. A lot of readiness, a lot of needs unfulfilled, but a status quo which was preventing companies from taking the plunge into remote work. Now everyone was forced to jump into emergency digitalization, emergency flexibility. Now that they have faced their fears, there's no going back. The new normal would have been shocking only a few months ago. Delivery companies and online retailers are operating on normal days at volumes often higher than on Black Friday a few years ago. Government services, who have kept bureaucracy alive for decades, are scrambling to put in place digital solutions, relaxing legal requirements. Education, which is a very traditional domain, is suddenly accepting remote interactions, focusing on the online. Multimedia content is now replacing the boring course on a blackboard. The impact on society is undeniable, and it's shocking the shortness of the duration in which it is occurring. And this brings the discussion a bit closer to home. There is another stronghold of paper, post-its, markers, whiteboards, the agile stereotypes, the stereotypical practices that have been associated with agile for a long time. Can agile survive this digitalization? Fortunately, under the radar, agility has evolved considerably. While it's true that back in the early 2000s, agile was a term coined to describe a radical approach, where informal face-to-face communication was short-circuiting long corporate email threads, where post-its were replacing intricate reports and graphs, where a few focused meetings were replacing entire planning and budgeting milestones, acceptance steps, performance reviews, process improvement of old school corporations. It was a symbol of the rebellion to embrace people-focused tools and interaction. It was a symbol to use a post-it instead of corporate tools. But now we are 20 years later, and the rebels are now the mainstream. Agile is the de facto way software is built nowadays. And digital platforms have risen into the opportunity. And more often, instead of moving post-its on the whiteboard, there's a platform where people are moving the virtual post-its on a virtual digital Kanban, and they are sharing that in near real time with the rest of their distributed team, often across organizations, often including outsourced roles, so connecting these organizations. And with these new instruments, new best practices had to adapt. An internal study, just to put, let's say, tangibility into the topic, has been done as Google, who has almost 100,000 employees, and they are not Amazon, they don't deliver packages. It's mostly software, product, internet-driven activities. Almost half their teams, 2 out of every 5 teams, involve people from multiple locations. And by several locations, we mean any combination of their 150 cities in 50 countries they are operating. They wanted to make sure that the approach is not unfair and unproductive in any way. And after careful analytics, because, well, it's Google, data is how the business is run, they found that working co-located or working with people from other locations did not influence any of the effectiveness metrics. The conclusion was that they found no difference in the effectiveness, performance ratings, or even promotions of individuals and teams whose work require collaboration with colleagues around the world versus employees who spend most of their time working with colleagues in the same office. So let me introduce one of Stefanini's approaches, one of the approaches that fits quite well in this context. And let's start with the opportunity. Why now? Why are we promoting this approach now? As they say, the proof is in the pudding. Before this moment, we have been encouraging customers throughout the years to use our virtual teams delivery capabilities. And they were often reluctant. They were reluctant to go all the way into virtualization and prefer to operate from Stefanini's location, but still in an office-based approach, often with physical separation between teams, usually using only one or few of Stefanini's delivery locations for their entire teams. This was kind of mirroring the reluctance in many of the established companies themselves to use this kind of flexibility within their operations. Since the COVID crisis, we have proven, for instance, in Europe at more than 99.9%, but in other regions at high percentages too, that we can operate almost fully in a remote setup for several months already without impacting any service to our customers. And those customers were all kind of already remote, and now we have brought the truly virtualization, not enforcing anymore the locations and the infrastructure to be facilities driven, let's say. We are quite confident in pushing virtualization even further across regions and across delivery locations, and joining it with our squads approach to take full advantage of their potential, because otherwise it's still just a team, but spread out. No, we are using the squads approach to give business focus to the solution, but I'm moving ahead of myself. Why virtual? Virtual because of the better market fit. Remote work is part of the new normal. Customers are now more open to remoteness. At the same time, we get better employee engagement. We get at least similar productivity. We get better motivation. We already have global access to talent, but now we can use this talent more flexibly and have a wider palette of skills and have cost effectiveness, especially in very difficult to find roles. And more often than not, outsourcing is extending the capabilities of an organization rather than replacing them. Well, of course, sometimes it happens to actually replace a function in a customer, but most of the time we are extending. So including seamlessly customer side members as needed is very important to the model. Last but not least, because we have a lot of experience with virtual delivery and distributed delivery. And why use squads as an ingredient? Why not remain only on agile teams? Because squads is a term that means many things to many people. Henrik Nyberg, who brought the approach used in Spotify to the public eye and started the craze back in 2012, was mentioning repeatedly that initially it was just intending to be a renaming of the agile team, to break from the stereotypes and open the organization to just revert to the core ideas of agility and start from heuristic adaptation. The well-known squads approach was positioned out of the box as a way to organize internally the organizational structures in a pure product development-driven company. However, in order to become a pragmatic offering, such as Stefanini's case, squads needs to be something a bit more elaborate. It needs a bit more tangibility. We're still talking about flexibility. Stefanini's squads model doesn't add to the constraints. It adds to the classical agile development teams' freedoms, some more degrees of freedom. We are embracing change not only at the level of the scope, but also at the level of the teams that are building that scope. The first freedom we are taking is the outcome focus. The squads are built for a purpose. Quite often, when the purpose changes, the squads need to also adapt, to change in some way, sometimes in size, sometimes in components, sometimes just in training specific people, etc. We follow the business priorities and always keep in mind the outcomes, not just the deliverables. We are not only building software, we are delivering solutions to the customer. The second would be the freedom we take with the wider array of skills. The wider array of skills that are available in this mix, because we don't restrain ourselves to software development and DevOps roles. From a design and innovation squad that can take user experience experts, business analysts, process consultants, to a squad focused on AI and machine learning, or even those, let's say, classic development and deployment squads, but that have to bring to life now modern DevOps approaches and need specific skill sets for that. All of this flexibility is helped by our ability to build a squad from several locations. We are maximizing both the internal availability, we are maximizing the speed with which we can adapt, and also the recruitment capabilities for those really hard to find profiles. The flexibility also extends to the involvement of each specialist. The involvement itself is tuned for the purpose. The fixed capacity development team, the classic Agile, X amount of full-time people, needs to evolve. And that has been replaced, especially for some roles which were not traditionally involved fully in the team, with partial allocations, specific purpose-driven involvements from specialized consultants, etc., who can still remain connected and aligned with the team, but not be involved all the time. All this flexibility creates not only benefits, its intrinsic complexity creates some overhead, but we are addressing that overhead and minimizing it through the use of tools and practices. Combining the two is basically driven by our existing capabilities. We are defining these virtual squads to share a common goal, and it's a multi-skilled team that delivers on that goal, leveraging modern cooperation tools and methodology. Stefanini, to bring this to life, is leveraging its global footprint to assemble the best talent we can identify for each specific squad. We do this faster than in any single location. We have better access to hard-to-find specialist profiles. We are, in general, more flexible and quicker to get results. And as we mentioned in the beginning, it's an end-to-end solution. It can apply to a lot of processes, and it can follow ideas right into production. Let me present you a scenario where a quite frequently encountered one, where we can leverage the virtual squads approach to bring ideas in a very pragmatic way in a typical company, to bring ideas to life. Let's start off a bit with the basics, the tooling and approaches we use for remote cooperation. We've all seen how physical interactions happen and how they become remote interactions. Actually, many interaction patterns are maintained. It's only the support for collaboration that has become digital. But some others are actually enriched. Now we can have live communication, and we can have, even in the code, in the IDE, in the code editor, integrations with Teams, with Slack. Workshops that took sometimes months to organize are suddenly feasible within hours. Travel costs become irrelevant. Information can be recorded and shared more easily, more precisely. No one is relying on memory, on handing over imprecise information. Everything is digital. And it's actually quite easy to get lost in the richness of solutions that are available now in the digital space. A recent report was counting more than 65 companies, each producing often multiple products. All were supporting digital collaboration, remote or not, but digital. It can be a lot. But we have big players in any industry. And while we are not very strict, so we are embracing the stacks that our customers are already using. We appreciate their existing familiarity with specific products, etc. We try to steer cooperation towards combining some of these main players. Some of them offer fully integrated ecosystems, such as the Microsoft offerings. Other suites, such as the one from Atlassian, are a bit more targeted, but also can connect a variety of environments and have great integration capabilities across the board. The established status of this solution means that people are more likely to have experience with them. They're more likely to be future-proof solutions. Their scalability has been already demonstrated. The market share will force their editors to ensure a certain level of quality of support, responsiveness, future extensibility. We're not saying that specialized applications, I don't know, InVision, Mural, Miro, Figma, etc., are not valuable. Those are quite specialized. And we are considering these live and team communication, planning, backlog, issue tracking, and documents collaboration to be core categories that are basically unavoidable. Additional tools can make other processes more productive, but these categories are unescapable. And for every tool, it's important to streamline configuration and agree on the practices to use. Ideally, as close as widely known best practices as possible. Because the tools provide just that, tools. It's having uniform practices and expectations that drives that familiarity and productivity in using them. And this is often at the level of the teams that are using them. Every project needs to have those agreed practices in place and to have the proper expectation from how the others will be using the same tools. Of course, having everything already digital makes everything else easier to digitalize. For instance, reviews, reporting are more effective. We can focus less on preparing reports and rather discuss in an agile way on the action supported by the data. We can dig into it at will and focus on the conclusions. And this is also helping us to share more easily knowledge. And sharing the knowledge is not limited to project and technical know-how. Everyone involved in our squads need to have access and do have access to a rich library of curated trainings that, combined with the coaching and mentorship that we do within the teams, creates a strong basis for accelerating any adjustments they need to make to work in this environment. People are sometimes coming from other projects with different contexts, from different employers, etc. And their onboarding and their adaptation to our practices is accelerated through this digital approach to training and reference knowledge. And of course, let's not forget there's a lot of supporting functions that need to operate smoothly around a multi-location complex solution. We've mentioned regions, we've mentioned countries. Yes, recruitment, finance, HR, IT, all of them traditionally have been quite specific to location. Compliance, security, legal are subject to different rules and regulations. Stefanini has pushed a lot over the years to integrate and set up global and regional coordination on all of these functions. And now it's paying off because the complexities of these aspects can remain transparent to our customers. They can focus on the benefits that the virtual squads are bringing and not care about all the, let's say, infrastructure below development and below the service we are providing. Let me take an example of just how we can use just a couple of squad types to follow a product feature from idea to production in a context of a rather realistic company. Typically, the environment in which your product portfolio is living is quite complex, and not only the fun new development parts deserve our attention. Input is flowing from several directions. New business-driven features are required, bugs appear, maintenance is required, interactions between products with different life cycles, working groups not synchronizing, infrastructure needs, everything. The established way to deliver software is to apply Agile development best practices, to use DevOps and Agile, such as Scrum or Kanban or hybrids, and this is where Agile feels at home. But as we move a bit higher into the organization, we reach a more lean-oriented, in the best cases, environment. Other times it's more traditional, where everything needs to be quantified basically in money, in return on investment. Value needs to be visible at every step. Efficiency, flow, value streams are the keywords in decision making at the company level. This often also changes the stakeholders that are involved and provides a bit of a constraining box on what's going on. And to complicate things a bit further, in the current fast-moving context, innovation is also a prime player. It needs to have its own context and its own speed. And while lean is a great way to keep an organization efficient, when trying to build innovation and build ideas and involve the end user experience into your products, then we need to move back into design thinking and into this kind of creative approaches that, again, are quite different and involve quite different stakeholders. We could divide these activities into a few levels of iterative evolution, just to simplify a bit the landscape. These environments have different preferred approaches, sometimes different stakeholders' expectations, but they're still connected. They're codependent. It only makes sense that we use the same approach, the same squad approach, to tailor our services for each of these tasks. In order to follow from ideation to production, a simple approach would be to use a design and innovation squad, to have people focused on understanding the end users and their needs, applying design thinking principles, prototyping approaches to obtain the validated concepts, those concepts that have already been approved to a certain level by the end user, by the business, and to fuel the pipeline of the new potential products and features. These initiatives are usually fueling a larger number of implementation and deployment squads who can first build a minimum lovable product. We'll go into what that is a bit later. And this is only later integrated into the normal life cycle of the portfolio of the entire organization, including all those bugs and maintenance and evolutions that we mentioned before. Unlike other approaches, we see that there is value in having even this sort of handover, sort of overlap. We can see that the design and innovation squads are present also during the other cycles, but to a lesser extent, and there is a bit of an overlap in what an implementation and deployment squad can do either on the product development side or in the maintenance and portfolio evolution side. But this handover is quite frequent in organization, and it's a requirement, if you want, sometimes to have predictability when doing the actual implementations, to have already this level of prototyping and clarification of the expectation performed, to have a good business case to approve. Because we have also a management landscape, and the management landscape is not looking only or not mainly at the products and how they're and what they are delivering, but to how they are delivering. And having Stefanini as a service provider also means interactions between organizations. It's ultimately a service that we are providing. So we need to interact with executives, we need to interact with the support teams, with other business stakeholders, with, of course, the product managers, but also internally to have visibility down from the daily scrum up to the strategy board. And we can see how this constant flow of information is pushing visibility at all layers, and at the same time we are pushing in the opposite direction the alignment with the strategy and with the business directions of the organization. We are a bit over time. Let me skip a bit here, just to a bit of the conclusion, and we can revisit some of the more people-focused topics while I listen also to what your questions would be and see in what direction our questions would go. Because what we are trying to do is to just remove the constraints of the office and the constraints of the geographical borders. We are searching for high-performing specialized teams, and we are doing this the best way we know, using the squads approach and using Agile and using the best tools that technology is putting at our disposal. Now, if you have any questions, please use the application to bring them. I will use these few minutes to also go one frequent question that we get when we show this example approach. Again, it's an example approach because squads provides us with much more flexibility. Can we have, how many types of squads do you have, let's say, templated, predefined? And the answer is quite a lot. The latest counts are around 15-ish, the ones that we have been using in several contexts. But the core of the squads approach is that for every business goal, for every purpose, for every business need, we are fine-tuning our squads. There are automation squads, there are data analytics squads. Some companies are able to also segment their products, so you can have a squad focused on a specific business section in products. Some others are only looking at functions such as testing automation, for instance, or service desk automation, etc. Another topic I would like to touch on, if we have a few minutes, because it kind of clarifies a bit how hassle-free all of this is, because nothing is completely free. The higher cost for increased flexibility is in a much more delicate way to build a team with careful management and motivation practices. It's not an accident that the trainings that you saw there were mostly people focused. They're mostly around Agile, and not only Agile practices, but Agile approaches, Agile mindset, around how to motivate people, how to build teams. Because on one hand, we need to promote discipline, and we don't mean obeying your boss, but rather submitting to the agreement of the group and the organization around us. In a common location, these constraints are externally enforced. When you are in an office, you when in Rome, you do as the Romans do. But when working remotely, people tend to drift away from common practices based on their various environments. And to maintain the cohesion of the teams, a joint agreement of the ways people interact with each other, how they need to follow specific practices as a form of respect for each other, ultimately, needs to be put in place. Unpredictability of anything is a stress source. If we can bring comfort and predictability to even the most basic tasks, such as how we use Teams or how we share a document in SharePoint Online or in Confluence, all of these need to be comfortable. And full team meetings should definitely not be skipped. They provide synchronization checkpoints. They are coupled with open communications are essential to maintaining the common goal visible, even though some people might consider them, well, we're just wasting time. No, we're not wasting time. We're building alignment, and we are all in it together. Mutual consideration should also be given to time zones. It sounds, well, simplistic, but it's often very relevant. People need to be respectful of each other, and that involves also alignment. Because what we are trying to do is basically to build the team. It's a very simplistic form to go into forming, storming, norming, performing. But yes, this is what we're doing. We are leading a remote team, and that requires the individuals to understand your vision. And this is how you're forming the team. It's important that your team understands the company goals as well as the tasks you're delegating to them. It might be helpful to organize training sessions to cover KPIs, expectations, task descriptions, etc. This shared environment creates the premises for people to start aligning among themselves. Then, of course, we have to have a personal connection that builds trust, that minimizes missed expectation, eases self-organization, boosts morale. Within the office, we have to take time to know everyone in the team. And as much as possible, we have to do this in the remote office as well. Personal connections are important. And the stronger they become, the greater the chance of seeing these colleagues as any other rather than distant co-workers. Of course, obtaining commitment is often accompanied by differences, negotiating of positions. Bringing them into the line not only fuels discussions, but it is the only way to solve them and to settle in the common direction. And we can maximize the golden hours. This is, well, probably many people take photos. You can take a photo at any time, but it takes a special light to bring the best out of a scene. You know, there's a difference between working well and working great, just like there is a difference between interacting and having valuable discussions and cooperation. Fine-tuning the quality of the teamwork is important for the satisfaction of everyone involved. Okay, and last but not least, let's not forget, any agile team is a marathon, and team members need to trust each other and the team as a whole. Only this way self-organization and true alignment can be obtained, and much of Agile relies on self-organization. That needs to work in order to reap the benefit, and sustainable pace is part of this. The team should not feel they are forced to burn out, and this is very relevant in remote setups. They're respected, and they have to feel confident in the value they can deliver. Okay. I understand there are no further questions right now. Of course, we rest at your disposal. You can reach us at any time, and a recording of the webinar will be available shortly on our website. I thank you. I thank you very much for your attendance. I thank you that you have taken the time to join us, and looking forward to meeting you in our future webinars. Thank you.